Alright, hey guys, I'm Tom the Tech Chap, and I've got every single iPad that Apple sells right now. From the £330 base iPad to the over $2,000 fully tricked out iPad Pro 12.9. You may have noticed that I made one of these pretty similar buying guides just a couple of months ago, but now we have a couple of new additions to the iPad family, including the iPad mini and what is unhelpfully called, well, the iPad. And so the new iPad mini has just had its biggest design overhaul for nearly a decade, and it looks just fantastic now. Plus the regular iPad, now in its 9th generation, and still the most affordable overall, has just had a much needed spec boost, and finally gets a decent sized base storage option at 64 gigs. So actually, both this and the mini have just jumped way up in my recommended iPad list. But which one should you actually buy? Well, I've tried to boil down all the important information, everything that you need to know to pick the right one, and hopefully you find it useful. And if you do, a cheeky little like and subscribe would be lovely. Okay, so these are the 5 main iPad models that Apple sell right now, including the 11 and 12.9-inch iPad Pros, and they're all running the just released iPadOS 15 software. And as usual, we get the different color and storage options, which vary between models, as well as cellular versions if you want a mobile data connection, although personally I usually just hotspot from my phone or use Wi-Fi. But there is a lot to think about. Screen size, processors, storage, accessories, cameras maybe, and it's all a balancing act against what you'll actually use it for, and of course, your budget. But first of all, why would you actually want to buy an iPad? Well, for me, it's quite simply the best tablet you can buy, and that's mostly down to the App Store and the sheer number of good iPad-optimized apps and games, although the less said about Instagram, the better. But not just that, they're also fantastic as a learning tool for kids and students. The Apple Pencil means they're great for digital artists and designers, and if you pair it with a keyboard, particularly the Magic Keyboard, they become a pretty good laptop alternative. Okay, so let's start with what is probably the most significant new addition, and also the smallest iPad, the 6th Gen Mini. In my last iPad roundup, which as I say was only a couple of months ago, I pleaded with Apple for a new Mini, which would basically be a shrunk down iPad Air, and that's pretty much exactly what we've got. And while then I had a hard time recommending the Mini, this one is a whole other story. Because an iPad you can use one-handed is incredible. And so if you don't need a huge screen, or you just want something that easily slips into your bag, or even your pocket, well, this should be the top of your list. It gets the same slim bezels and squared off design as we see on the larger Air and Pros, as well as stereo speakers, the Touch ID power button on top here, along with the slightly odd new placement of the volume buttons. And while overall it's about the same size as the last Mini, the display is actually a fair bit bigger, 8.3 inches versus 7.9. Plus it's taller, it's got less of a square aspect ratio, so we're actually getting smaller black bars when you watch videos and movies on this. It is still using a 60Hz IPS screen, so no fancy OLED or ProMotion here unfortunately, but it's still sharp, color accurate, and it looks good. And it's also packing the brand new Apple A15 Bionic chip, which is the same one that we get in the new iPhone 13s, which actually makes this the most powerful iPad outside of the 2 Pro models that come with the M1 chip. Other new stuff? Well, we get improved cameras front and back, including this very nifty new 12 megapixel ultra-wide selfie camera, which supports Apple's center stage, where the camera will crop in and track your face in video calls. We also get an extra gig of RAM, up to 4 from the previous Mini, as well as Apple Pencil 2 support and a USB-C port. No lightning in sight. Downsides? Well, we have lost the headphone jack, the 3.5mm jack which we had on the old Mini. That is gone, unfortunately, so you will have to use wireless Bluetooth earphones with this. Also, while the A15 chip is a lot more powerful, in my tests between sort of 80 and 100% faster than the previous Mini, in sort of everyday use you don't always see that benefit, that extra performance, although when it comes to loading bigger games or doing more demanding tasks, then yes, this is significantly faster. Now the entry-level 64 gig version of the Mini will cost you about £480 or $500, which is a pretty hefty £150 premium over the regular iPad with the same storage. And if you want to go up to 256 gigs of storage, it's £619. Plus if you want 5G as well to make it the sort of ultimate portable device, add another £140 onto that as well. And that's before we even consider a case or a pencil, so things can start to get pricey. But for the base 64 gig model, the compact size, the new design, and the extra speed makes this Mini a great choice, and I think it actually might be my new favorite iPad. Now, quick side note, because every single iPad here, except this one, the regular iPad, supports the Apple Pencil Gen 2, which actually in terms of responsiveness and latency is pretty much the same as the first one, but it's a bit more comfortable because we have this flat edge, so you can sort of get a better grip. It also stops it from rolling off your table all the time. And crucially, it's a whole lot more convenient because you don't have to plug it into the Lightning port like we do here. So you have a giant, very expensive lollipop, which is just the worst design ever. So really the reason you'd want the Gen 2 Pencil is because it does, well, not that, it does that. It magnetically attaches to the side of the iPad and then wirelessly charges, which is just, I think, about 1 billion times more convenient than this thing. To be honest with you, I don't really use the Pencil that much, so I probably wouldn't buy one, but for proper drawing, note-taking, or a bit of doodling, it's a great option to have. Okay, next up, we have the brand new 9th generation iPad. Just the iPad. And it's definitely a case of meet the new iPad, same as the old iPad, because design-wise, this has barely changed in the past 5 or 6 years, with the same chunky bezels, top and bottom, that Touch ID home button, which I know some people prefer, and also the older, less versatile Lightning port. The thing is though, there's nothing wrong with it. It's functional, and importantly, it's a lot cheaper than the others, but it does feel a bit, well, very last gen, especially now that we have this new redesigned Mini. But I would argue you should look beyond that, because this will do 95% of what most people want their iPad to do, even the top-end Pro. And for about £330 or $350 for the base 64 gig version, and actually even less if you're buying for education reasons, you're getting pretty much the full iPad experience here for almost half of what you'll pay for the similarly sized iPad Air. Front and center is this 10.2-inch screen, and it's big, it's bright, it's sharp, and just like the rest of the range, we also get True Tone, which adjusts the screen's white balance to match your lighting, and it's a little bit more comfortable for your eyes. However, the only downside is the display isn't laminated, so there's a very small but just about noticeable air gap between the glass and the actual screen, although it's not the end of the world. And it's still more than fast enough, and actually Apple claims it's 20% quicker than last year's model with the A13 chip that we get now. Also, like the Mini, in fact, every iPad now except for the Air, we get the new 12-megapixel ultra-wide selfie camera with center stage. So if you want something for browsing, watching movies and TV, bit of gaming, FaceTime calls, or I think actually ideally for a child for educational apps, my nephew Oliver absolutely loves this thing.
Ha, I got the key.
Then this is more than up to the task.
I'm a chat.
Yes, it looks a bit older and it's not had quite the same update that the Mini has, but who cares? For £330, this is incredible value for money. And it is also compatible with the Smart Keyboard, which is still a little bit pricey, although nowhere near as much as the Magic Keyboard, but it protects it, obviously it gives you that keyboard functionality, and it's quite a nice extra actually. Okay, moving on, and in the middle of the group we have the iPad Air. So this is the 4th gen Air, which actually came out almost a year ago now. So while it is just like a scaled up Mini, the lack of a 2021 update means the Air actually has a previous gen A14 chip and also gets the older FaceTime camera without center stage. Although the main camera on the back is a little bit better on the Air, but really who uses that? It also costs about £100 or $120 more than the new Mini, but for that you are getting a much larger 10.9-inch screen and an almost identical look and feel to the more expensive 11-inch iPad Pro. And the Air is just a lovely thing to use, with this big color-accurate screen, it's thin and lightweight, I love the color options, and unlike the regular iPad, this gets USB-C, stereo speakers, Touch ID and the power button, and Wi-Fi 6. But for me, one of the big reasons you might want to go for the Air actually and pay that bit extra over these two is because it works with the Magic Keyboard. The Air and the Pros are the only compatible iPads with this, but it just transforms it almost into a proper laptop replacement. However, if you don't really need the keyboard that much, then things are a little bit trickier because versus the base iPad, the Air does all the same stuff, albeit with a smarter design, slightly faster chip, USB-C and Pencil 2 support. And the thing is, this costs a good £250 more than the regular iPad for the same amount of storage, 64 gigs, and also near enough the same IPS 60Hz screen. So the problem is less that the Air is too expensive, It's that the basic iPad is such good value and does pretty much everything the Air can. Also, jumping up to 256 gigs on the Air makes even less sense because while obviously more storage is great for having more games and movies, at £729, you're then only 20 quid short of the 128 gig 11-inch iPad Pro, which comes with plenty of other advantages of its own. But just going back to this Magic Keyboard for a second, and if you are serious about working on your Air or Pro, then I can't recommend this Magic Keyboard enough. While iPadOS 15 didn't give us some of the rumored sort of desktop app support like proper Final Cut Pro, which many of us had sort of wished to the Apple gods, we do get much better multitasking, and paired with this Magic Keyboard, which gives us a really good size, comfortable keyboard, along with a touchpad and an extra USB-C port, which means you can actually charge using one of them and then use the other for plugging in peripherals like extra storage. It also acts as a protective case, you can adjust the angle, and because it attaches magnetically, you can just grab the iPad to take it off. You can save a little bit of money and go with the Smart Keyboard Folio, but this loses the trackpad, the extra USB-C port, and the nicer keys and layout of the Magic Keyboard. So finally, let's talk about these two, the big dogs, the iPad Pros, and we've got the 11 and the 12.9. So the 11 is much more of a tablet size experience, whereas the 12.9 looks and feels a lot more like a laptop size screen. Now both of these were refreshed not long ago, mid-2021, and the big news is that they get Apple's fantastic M1 processor, which is the same chip used in the new MacBooks and iMacs, albeit in a slightly lower power form, as well as more RAM and storage, and on the 12.9 exclusively, we have this gorgeous mini LED screen. Honestly, the M1 chip in this is just ludicrously fast, and actually compared to the next fastest chip, the A15 in the Mini, it's still a good 50 to 100% faster, so realistically this is overkill for most of us. But if you are a power user working with maybe 10-bit 4K video or high megapixel images or 3D design, then this is probably the one to get. Now between the two, other than the screen and the size, these are basically identical. And in basic terms, we get the sleek aluminium design similar to the Air and the Mini, although this improves on those models slightly with even thinner bezels. But crucially, one of the big upgrades is we get ProMotion, which is Apple's fancy marketing term for a 120Hz refresh rate screen. And so everything you do, from swiping between home screens, using apps, or even the more responsive pencil, you do definitely appreciate having that smoother refresh. We also get insanely good quad speakers, the TrueDepth Face ID scanner instead of Touch ID, as well as an ultra-wide camera lens and a LiDAR sensor so you can measure your, rooms, I guess. The Pros also now get 8 or 16 gigs of RAM, depending on the storage option, as well as a faster USB 4 port that supports Thunderbolt 3, as well as a 5G option. And the cameras also benefit from the M1 chip, which actually helps reduce noise and gives a more sort of natural white balance. Plus, we do get that 12 megapixel ultra-wide FaceTime camera with center stage. So obviously, if you could have any iPad, you'd want one of these, but they are very expensive, with the 11-inch starting at about £750, going up to $1,000 for the 12.9. And that's with 128 storage. If you bump it up to 256 and then maybe add the keyboard and pencil, you're suddenly up to about £1,600, which is premium laptop money. Interestingly though, the iPad Pro 12.9 actually costs the same as the base spec MacBook Air. This is actually the Pro, but you know what I mean. And actually then when you add in a Magic Keyboard, this gets more expensive. So at this point, it might be worth considering if a MacBook Air or Pro is actually a better option, although of course you don't have a touchscreen, but with the latest macOS software, we do now get support for some mobile apps. So I still don't know if an iPad can really be a proper laptop replacement yet, not until I can get full Final Cut or Premiere Pro for me at least. So if I did have $1,000 or $1,200 to spend, then I would probably go with a laptop. Downsides? Well, price, obviously, and also while the M1 races out ahead in terms of benchmarks, the reality is this doesn't feel much faster in regular apps and even demanding games. So this is really a case of untapped potential. It's future-proofing to the max. So instead, a more visible upgrade is this mini LED screen that's exclusive to the 12.9-inch Pro. And side by side, well, you can judge for yourself, but the LED LCD's blacks look like a washed out gray versus the more contrasty, proper inky blacks that we get on the mini LED. Having said that, for non-HDR apps and content, the difference isn't as obvious as they both peak at 600 nits of brightness, although when you do jump into some properly good HDR video, you do get 1000 nits on the mini LED, with areas peaking up to 1600. And it makes a big difference, it's a lot more vibrant. Although on the downside, there is some blooming around brighter objects, which is made more obvious thanks to the much darker black areas. So whether mini LED is worth paying the extra 250 quid or so over the 11-inch is down to your use case really. If you're watching a lot of movies or you're doing sort of really color sensitive work, photo, video editing, then probably yeah. Plus of course you are getting the bigger, more laptop sort of experience size screen. But for regular non-HDR content then, I don't think it's as big of a deal. But having said all that, maybe you shouldn't buy any of these, because no one needs an iPad, you kind of need a phone, you probably need a laptop. These are more of a sort of luxury, nice to have item. And even then, while you get some really nice upgrades with these latest ones, there's nothing wrong at all with a used or refurbished iPad from the last 1 to 2 years. Refurbs are great, plenty of companies do them, although official Apple ones can be a bit pricey. But if you can find some good deals on outgoing 8th gen regular iPads, or perhaps seeking out a used iPad Air 4th gen or iPad Pro from 2018 or 2020, they're fantastic and will probably save you a whole bunch of money. Okay, let's wrap up, and I've got 3 big takeaways. Firstly, storage. Apple price gouges on storage. They know that the 128 is probably what you want, which is why they give you 64 and 256 gig options. It's a pain in the backside, but they know what they're doing. So really, if you're streaming everything and you're not downloading a ton of big games, 64 gigs is absolutely fine. Don't go crazy, particularly on the cheaper models. Secondly, unless money is no object, or at least less of an object, you probably don't need an iPad Pro. Yes, the Pro Motion is nice, the extra cameras, and that M1 chip, but it's not really fully taken advantage of, and I would probably just go with the Air if you're considering them. And thirdly, even if it doesn't make it a full laptop replacement, if you're going for an Air or a Pro, I would highly recommend getting the Magic Keyboard, or even just the smart keyboard case on the regular iPad. It makes a big difference to how usable they are. So between them, I would probably say, while it's harder to recommend than it used to be, the iPad Air is still the best all-rounder. In terms of value for money, 100% all day long, the regular iPad, and actually for kids, 100% go for this one. For me, I have to say, I think the iPad mini, this new 6th gen, is probably my favorite new iPad. If you already have a big iPhone, like a Pro Max, then maybe it's not really worth going for this and you want a bigger one. But if you have a regular size phone, even though you don't get proper keyboard support with this outside of Bluetooth separate keyboards, this is such a fun iPad to use for reading, for bits of gaming, doodling with the Apple Pencil. It's a little bit pricey, but I really like this thing. But if you've got any questions at all, or you think I've missed something, then do let me know in the comments below. A cheeky like and subscribe would be very much appreciated if you did enjoy it, and I'll also leave links to all of these in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll catch you next time right here on the Tech Chat.